And this is his rule of thumb for soft surfaces. 1 inch on, falling on an acre equals 27,000 gallons. And again, he's got coefficients that help you if it's running off of gravel, sand, sod, whatever. He has some adjustments so that you can tune it in a little more carefully to your site. So it's really important because you have to, if you're building a cistern or a pond or you have an IBC container that you want to fill, you need to know how fast is that going to fill, and if you fill it, how much benefit is it going to give you. We looked at a site yesterday where they installed an upper pond, but the upper pond was to store water during times of plenty and then replenish and water the land in the times of dry. Well, they had about 3 weeks of storage, and boom, they were through the whole thing. So that wasn't as efficient a pond as they might have built. It probably needed to be 2 or 3 times bigger, deeper, whatever they needed to do. So you need to know what the volumes are. And then how are you going to capture it? Well, you can do channels, swales, catchments. The way you decide is you start to look at, why do I want to capture? What is my purpose? Is it for stock? Is it for irrigating my farm? Do I only need it part of the year? What am I going to do with it in the winter? So all of those things are part of your decision about how you're going to capture this precipitation. And then how are you going to deliver it? If you're capturing it somewhere and then delivering it to a storage area, be that a wetland, a pond, a container, you need to know how you're going to move it, and then from that container, how are you going to move it to the key areas that you want to use it. So think that all through, and that's going to help guide you in what kind of a system that you need. Now, of course, the element that isn't up here is your property, the conditions on your property, your soil, etc. So those factor in too, but this is the first step that you want to go through. And then should you, instead of channeling or catching it, can you just slow it and diffuse it? If you want to do that, you have a lot of choices here too. Do you want to do it by grading? Do you have the ability to grade or excavate, berms, swales, terraces, key lines? Do you want to just use objects? You can use things to diffuse the water. If it's coming down in a sheet, you can have plants, grass strips, rock, hay bales, erosion socks, gabion, weirs, logs, hay bales, erosion socks, and I have some photos of these things because some people aren't familiar with some of those items. Or channel it specifically through a drain or a perf pipe, a French drain, cross slot drills. So again, a whole suite of choices that depend on not only your financial capability, your energetic capability, but also what your site suggests to you that it needs the most. So what do we mean by grading? Well, here's a typical swale, and in this crowd, I don't think I need to go into swales too much. I think many of you know what that is. It's a divot taken out on contour. The extra soil that's taken out of there is placed below. And swales can really be as short as this long. So don't think that a swale has to just like trail across your landscape as if you're terracing your property. You can do them in bits and pieces. You can do them as curves, make little eyebrow swales just below the key elements that you want to get more water. This is across the contour. Frankly, I look at this landscape and say, why are they doing that? It looks pretty flat to me. There might be a very good reason. It may be a very, very wet area. So I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying when I first look at that, I wouldn't put a swale on land that flat. It could be the picture's confusing me. And they look a little rough when you first get started, so be prepared for that too. But the first thing you want to do is start putting some mulch down and covering all this. You don't want all that bare soil exposed. A key line. A key line is finding the inflection point, the change in slope from steep to not so steep, and that change line is where you want to start looking at for your inflection point, then your key point, and then you come out slightly off contour because you want to distribute the water. So if you stay on contour, it's not going to distribute very far. It's just going to stay there. But you want to bring it down, and that's what these red dotted lines are indicating, how you're bringing that down off the slope. Slowing and diffusing by objects. I went through this list earlier. I won't go through it again. But here's some examples. Planting strips, grass strips, fencing, wattles, more wattles. This is straw and actually stuffed into a tube. A net tube. You'll see erosion socks that look like that they use in highway or road construction sites to prevent the sediment generated from construction going into a local stream. Even a snow fence. Snow fences can be fabulous because you can capture so much snow that would, in many cases in Montana, just pass through vertically or horizontally. So you can capture that, and then come spring, you're going to have a nice load of water right there. So you might want to have some kind of a channeling system under there so that when it melts, you can take it more to where you want it or need it. A few other options. This is a more formalized channel, really bringing the water over in this gravel-lined channels. This is a gabion. It's basically a wire basket that's filled with heavy stuff that's permeable. And so this is gravel, old concrete, whatever. And you can actually get pretty creative. And this is a real nice little head wall, creating an entrance to a culvert that goes under a road. Likewise, this is an interesting little kind of gabion, Hugelkultur, something or other, I don't know. But it looked pretty cute, so put it up there. And then using a yeoman's plow for a cross-slot drill. You know, a lot of times in permaculture classes with the cross slot drill and the key line and all that stuff. A lot of times we don't really know what that looks like. Well, this is a cross slot drill, and this is the one style, and this is the wheel style. And while this is in a no-till setting, and so you're breaking the soil up in just a little line so you can drop in seed, but you can also drop in fertilizer. You can drop in biochar, seed. You can do it all at once, so you just make one pass through your field, and you've cut the sod as well as done your planting and fertilizing. This is a cross-slot drill here, and it's got these little prongs that stick out on the side, and so it digs into the soil and actually just rips it. And it's really cool when you look at a cross-section, especially like if you drop in biochar, because it really highlights it, but you can see where it drops straight down and then spreads out sideways. So very interesting technique, but that's what that looks like. French drain is basically a perforated pipe. Typically, you lay it in a bed of gravel. You may, depending on your soil, you may or may not want to use a piece of erosion cloth. You could use shade cloth, anything that keeps the fines out of that gravel. But I've built them without using the cloth. But on top, if you're going to have a fair amount of traffic on top, you do want like an erosion cloth or shade cloth over the top of it so you don't pound a lot of fines into your gravel and then it stops sucking in so much water. And the principle of this is the water is flowing across the landscape here, it's going to hit this suddenly very porous zone and drop down in. And then it'll be collected in this pipe, and the pipe helps to move it and spread it, but it also has holes in it, so it's distributing as it goes. Of all places, this was on the website of the Missouri Botanical Garden, and it's really it's really quite smart. It's talking about rainscaping, and particularly on a small lot, but it covers all the major things that we can do. Green roof, alternatives to lawns, soil amendments and mulching, managing your yard, woodland restoration, creek corridor restoration, a rain garden, capturing water off the roofs, developing a swale to come down here and water your rain garden. You can use little terracing here with rock weirs and filter socks, permeable pavers. Very smart little handy checklist for what you might be doing. But we're going to focus in right now on storing water in the soil. Soil. We have so many interesting things going on. Below the ground, when we think about storing water, we want to think about what's below the surface. We want biodiverse plantings so that we have a very diverse root zone, that we have tap roots, we have diffuse roots that spread across the surface, we have deep diffuse roots. Biochar is something that we can put in the soil to help maintain moisture in soils. Biochar can reduce your irrigation needs by up to 30%, depending on your soils. So it holds a lot of water, and so that's a very good tool tool. Using no-till, strip-till, or vertical till, if you actually are engaged in that type of agriculture, you want to think about what's happening above ground, windbreaks, shelter belts, hedgerows, filter, snow fences. These are the kinds of things we talked about before that, well, snow fence is a structure. But cover crops, using agroforestry. I'm a huge fan of agroforestry, and I really think that it's key to helping us address the climate issue. And so that was why I was so excited when my pal, Paul Hawken, puts out a book called Drawdown. And if you don't have this book, I would suggest you find it. In this, there are many authors that contributed to this, and in this they identify 81 solutions that actually take carbon out of the atmosphere and store it in the soil or in other permanent and semi-permanent methodologies. But for permies, here's the deal. Oh, I wonder if I put this in here. I put it in my other one, but I'll just tell you. In the top 23 tools that reduce carbon, and this is also looking at the cost too, so it's a cost-benefit ratio. Number 4, plant-rich diet. Number 9, silvopasture. 11, regenerative agriculture. 12, temperate forests. 15, afforestation, that's planting trees where they're not currently trees. 16, conservation agriculture. 17, tree intercropping. 19, managed grazing. 23, farmland restoration. And then there's a lot more sprinkled through here. Multistrata agroforestry. Multistrata, don't we love that? Guilds. Biomass, forest protection. These are all wonderful ways to trap and store carbon. So what we're talking about here not only helps you as the individual farmer, rancher, gardener, permie, it's helping everybody. It's helping the entire planet. So keep doing it. Agroforestry, shade. How do you save more moisture in your soil? Shade it. Less evaporation. Guilds, layering, swales. And then how do you manage your property? Planned or rotational grazing. Actually, I've been corrected multiple times. Planned grazing means you're moving your cattle around, or your herbivores around when the site requires it. Rotational grazing, people tend to think of more of that. It's like, oh, it's Tuesday the 5th, I have to move my cows today. And that's not really what planned grazing is all about. Crop rotation, forest thinning, irrigation, controlled burns. Do not try this at home, but it can work. One of the things that you want to do, whatever you're doing, is you want to hold it in with mulch. Mulch, mulch, mulch. And you can use any kind of biomass that's clean, not toxic. Vegetation, cover crops, ground cover, amendments, manure, soil, compost, any kind of decomposables, cotton, wool, shorn wool. You walk around my garden and sometimes you become alarmed because it looks like there's a dead animal laying under a tree. It's actually one of my sheep's. Oh, you betcha, thank you. It's just from shearing. I have wool that sometimes isn't good quality, and that just goes in the garden. And then you can use inerts. And inerts are good for temporary if you have nothing else, but I don't recommend using them as a common practice. And if you use polyester or plastic in particular, that will break down. So not a great idea, but if you have nothing else, it can hold in a pinch. So let's talk quickly about agroforestry. Trees. You gotta love trees. You know, when I was in the Forest Service, it just broke my heart because trees, back in the day, this was a while ago, and the Forest Service has dramatically improved, I've got to tell you. But a tree was like board feet. You know, you got to cut it down and chop it up into pieces, and then it has value. You know, not at all. The tree has just is absolutely invaluable. All these things that it does, and I won't read them to you. You can see that, or you probably know, but I will highlight these last two. Communications. trees communicate with their entire ecosystem. They communicate through the ground. They talk to mycelia. They give mycelia information. Mycelia gives information to trees. Trees will put water down into the soil beyond the edge of their root zone. They will try to fill up the soil. And when they get the signal that, hey, the neighborhood is pretty dry, trees will go, okay, I can help you there. They'll bring up water through the soil to benefit all organisms around them. They have so many phytochemicals, we haven't even identified them all. There's like 230 different phytochemicals. And so if a tree has an issue or learns of an issue, be it an insect, disease, whatever, it sends out the chemicals to warn others that this is happening in the neighborhood. You need to be careful. So it communicates, and I think they communicate with us too, but we'll get into that at a later date. But they're also a health enhancer. If you take an hour-long walk in the woods, your positive chemicals in your body will be elevated for a week. Hello, a week. You know, it doesn't mean you only get it when you're standing there. And then what's really wild is that if you can even see trees from your home, your serotonin levels, again, are elevated. A study done found that if in a housing project, if you can see trees from your apartment, domestic abuse is reduced by 40%. That is way cool. A lot of those interesting studies are in a book written by Jim Robbins called The Man Who Planted Trees. And there's 2 books out by that name, but look for the one by Jim Robbins. And he has a lot of fascinating studies woven in there. Yeah?
I was going to say, a lot of the holistic practitioners who I've met over the years actually will tell their clients to go spend a day out in the forest, leave your phone like at home or in the car or whatever, and go be out with the trees. And they say there's almost nothing as effective. You can't give somebody herbs or whatever they can.
Absolutely, and we find that in Japanese medicine now. That's a very common prescription in Japan.
Do you think it has anything to do with the negative ions?
Probably. That's part of it. You know, they're producing oxygen, so you're getting more oxygen in your system. But it goes beyond that. It's not just a simple, because you could just suck on an oxygen tank and deal with that, have that boost, but it's other things. It's the other chemicals I think that the tree is exuding. Yes?
Can you help a tree heal if it has pine blisters?
Yes.
Just like a tree doctor?
You can. Let me talk with you afterwards, because that gets a lot more complicated about what's attacking the tree and what the circumstances are. But one of the sad things about trees that is just coming to light recently in a number of studies is the looking at drought effects on trees, and what actually happens in trees if they are in a prolonged drought. They will suffer cell collapse, and so I think it's the phloem that collapses. The phloem cells, they don't re-inflate. So if a tree is damaged in a prolonged drought, for the rest of its life, it has lost some of those transport channels. And so that's why when you have years of drought in a row, you start to see forests dying. They can usually weather that, a bang or two, an annual kind of drought. But if it's prolonged, those cell walls keep collapsing to the point where the tree can no longer provide enough moisture to the above ground. Well, why agroforestry? And this is just basically working trees into your system, into our polyculture systems. It gives us this enhanced resilience, much greater diversity, and it retains water, and therefore it reduces risk. And you can use agroforestry within your primary cropping system. You can use it, just a multi-purpose windbreak is a form of agroforestry. Productive woodlots. And so but the key here is diversification. Fruit and nut production. Riparian restoration, utilization of corners and niches. That's a good place to start a little agroforestry project. You'll see that a lot now in where you have center pivot irrigation. Those little corners that don't get covered, those are great places to do some agroforestry work. And woody cropping on floodlands. What a better idea than building a house, say, on a floodland. So silvopastures. Silvopastures are really cool. That's basically blending the elements that are required by your desired livestock and your desired tree species, tree and woody shrub species. And not every combination works, and if you come to my next presentation, we'll dive into the details on how to create a silvopasture. But it improves plant vigor. It, again, increases biodiversity, which is really important, reduces wildfire risk, and it actually, besides improving wildlife habitat, you can improve your income because you have a lot of diversity now, a lot of different products. But one thing that I didn't have here is that, well, I did, lower animal stress. Animals can actually be 25% heavier if they are grazing in a silvopasture, and they tend to graze quietly all day and spend a lot more time lying down. And that is a lot less stress on the animal than if they're roaming around in the heat, you know, trying to get the nutrition that they need. So, forest garden farming, a lot of us do that. Food forest, whatever you want to call it, we love that. We can convert small areas to high productivity. We do polycultures with domestic natives, perennials, annuals, use the vertical and horizontal space. And we can incorporate some livestock, particularly like a little chicken tractor here, diversify our yields, and we're building soil at the same time. Another form is alley cropping, and this is a little more organized for people who have a hard time, like my neighbors who come over and I took them on a tour of my gardens, and I heard they told another neighbor, well, she said she was showing us her garden, but I didn't see any garden. So, they were looking for the rows and the bare soil between the rows, and that's not what my gardens look like. But alley cropping, if you've got some kind of a tree, a production tree, and either be it nuts or timber or whatever, there's still space in between. So a great place to grow annuals. Why not some medicinal herbs? How about some calendula or a nitrogen fixer like fava beans? So, you know, it has a lot of the same benefits that I've already mentioned. I won't read the list, but great protection from wind, from drying out, and utilizing that space. And then when you're ready to harvest, that crop is gone, and then so you have the alley to operate in. So, yep.
Would shade-grown coffee come under, is that intercropping?
Well, with your shade-grown coffee, I think you'd want to be putting that like maybe right down the center or in groups, because I don't know what tree you would be growing with the coffee, but you want to make sure you don't cut off access or you trash your coffee bushes when you are doing something with your trees. So as long as you've got access, you sure could, and it would be great.
Ms. Barr, most shade-grown coffee is grown under large legume trees that will cover many coffee plants and do nitrogen fixing.
Perfect.
But there's a wide variety of plants used for shade coffee.
Mm-hmm. And I would think that sounds like a better model than an alley.
Yeah, they may put the coffee plants in alleys, but the trees grow up and cover maybe dozens of actual coffee plants.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you.
Mature coffee.
Thank you. Windbreaks. You know, on one hand, I love windbreaks. On the other hand, it breaks my heart when I see people planting like a fast-growing poplar and a blue spruce, and it's like, why are you planting those species when you could plant others that are far more productive and far happier in this particular location? But one of the fun things is that with a windbreak, you can get protection and increase soil moisture up to 400 feet on your downwind side. So the windbreak is not just for wind, but it also helps you conserve moisture in your soils. And so you can do, this is just I won't go into the details here, but it's really fun on what you can actually construct to make a productive windbreak. Oh, and one thing I had on here, the enhancing aesthetics. Don't let anybody tell you that aesthetics aren't important or beauty should be something you consider last. Are you kidding me? We're human beings. What do we place a value on? Oh, a nice looking car, a nice looking spouse, you know, some nice artwork, a nice looking house, my nice looking clothes, you know. We're all about beauty. That's what drives us. So to have someone tell you, and I actually had somebody tell me, well, I tell all my clients not to worry about the beauty part because we got to get the function down. It's like, you're not going to have many clients, you know, because you've got, the beauty is what brings people in. The functionality is what they discover after they've been brought in. And riparian buffers. Again, these can be highly productive areas. Again, plants that can withstand some flooding, but these can be highly productive. They don't just need to be, you know, let's get some utilitarian species in there. And by productive, you know, we can be talking about basket making. And energy crops. I include this because it technically is one. To purpose grow biomass, I don't recommend it. I don't think that we need to. We have plenty of biomass, and the biomass that we want to see for energy or for making biochar, I'll just mention that. I have a brochure on biochar back there. We have so much woody biomass as residuals from agriculture and forestry that we don't need to be purpose growing energy crops. But if you happen to be able to harvest some energy crops, that's great. And we don't ever want to use things that we can compost readily as an energy source or for making biochar. So,
But we have a huge strategy with ethanol, huge amounts of production. Corn, it's turned into alcohol.
yeah, but what happens when we...
Economies are sustained on it too.
Well, they are, but look what happened when we started giving out a lot of ethanol subsidies to the Midwest. Everybody started growing corn, so you went back to a monoculture, and then you caused a food crisis and hunger crisis in Mexico because the price of corn skyrocketed. So all these systems are interconnected, and so where you can get the energy return on energy invested, which you don't get with ethanol, corn-based ethanol, I can support that. But we get a little wilded up and start subsidizing stuff like this. Or, you know, twice now in a farm bill, we've had to beat back a proposal to use conservation reserve program lands for biomass production. Wah. Wrong, we don't do that. And so people get enthusiastic and they make some bad decisions or incentivize poor behavior.
The other exception is most of us heat with wood.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I heat with wood, but I'm thinning the dead and diseased trees or the trees that are too dense on my property and converting that to firewood. So it's my excess biomass. More of what we want. Less tillage, more photosynthesis, diversity of outputs, all of these, you know, and I'm not even sure I have beauty in there too, but we want, oh, I do. Flexible harvest, plant protection, you know, all these wonderful things we learn as permies that are all outputs from agroforestry type production and also from building the soil and retaining moisture in the soil. So let's dive in real quickly here. Do we have to stop at 3:30? 3:30? Oh, good. We're good. I want to make sure we have a little bit of time for questions afterwards. Okay, let's talk about forest management for wildfire resilience. There's a lot of good programs out there for homeowners. There's a Living with Fire program. A lot of agencies and organizations have come together realizing that getting the private landowner the education and the knowledge and the financial assistance that they need to thin their property is a benefit for the entire community. It's a benefit for public and private lands. So and I'll get into some of the resources that are available too to help you thin. So what's the issue? Well, the issue is that for over 100 years we've practiced aggressive fire suppression. Again, Wrong idea, wrong thing to do, because fire is a very important part of the landscape and very important for restoring forests. And so by suppressing fires, we have increasing density, and that's in forest terms, that's called stems per acre. And so we have a very high stems per acre, or basal area, the amount of wood that's actually sitting on that land. We have this kind of a forest tends to favor shade-tolerant trees. And shade-tolerant trees have a lower fire tolerance. And by shade-tolerant, we mean trees that require shade to get started, not necessarily trees that require shade through their entire lifespan. Like Doug fir is a shade-tolerant tree. It requires shading to sprout and start to grow, but then it wants sun, and then it's going to compete. And so that's why you see so many sites that used to be just maybe large ponderosa pine, and now you can see the few pines in between this thicket of Doug fir. Well, that's because pines are not shade tolerant. They're very resistant to fire, and they need open space and light to germinate and to sprout. So we're suddenly getting a lot more shade-tolerant trees, and these shade-tolerant trees have a lower fire tolerance. It increases competition. So we just said, geez, our moisture looks like we're going to have even more moisture-limited forests than we had before. Well, and then you've got all these trees competing. And a Doug fir, for instance, takes 4 to 5 times more water than a ponderosa pine. So you have all these water-hungry trees coming up in great density, but we've got this warming climate which tends to promote insect and disease. And so we have insects that now can hatch 3 times in a year, whereas before they used to be maybe every other year. So we're starting to move from endemic to epidemic in many areas. We've lost millions of acres of trees in the West, area almost the size of Colorado.
Lori? Mm-hmm. So is the pine beetle infestation that I dealt with like 5, 6, 7 years ago, did it cycle down at this point, or is it still rolling?
It's still rolling. But it's killed so many trees that, and at some point, it's kind of eaten itself out of house and home, and so it's rolling, but it's still going on.
Another question is, so that project was a 2-year project, you used fuel mitigation grants to do that on 40 acres. The increase in forest health was phenomenal in a single year after we finished it. It was just exploded in all this diversity of life.
Beautiful.
Is that possible? Well, I know it's possible to go into the national forest and do it that way, but you're going in and you're selecting a few big trees, but mostly you're taking out other stuff that isn't as valuable. Can we make that happen on a larger scale?
Yes. And I'm involved with that with the Colville National Forest. I'm on the Northeastern Washington Forestry Coalition, and our coalition's been around for about 16 years, and I've only been with them past 5. But most of the work that's being done on the Colville is forest restoration, and we do a lot of thinning. But we do a variable density. We do skips and gaps, like we leave islands that are just untouched, and then we'll cut fairly heavily. We leave all hardwoods. When I went out there and looked at what they were doing, it was like I would have given my left arm when I was in the Forest Service to see activity like that. And I'm not saying everybody's doing it great, or that there still aren't some hog and loggers around, but the Forest Service is very keen now on restoration, on stewardship projects, and really looking for innovations on ways that we can move these landscapes out of this intense, dense, fire-prone situation, and give them more of a capability more resilience to fend for themselves. Yes.
Is there funding available, or are
There is.
incentives?
There is, and I will get to that. So So we have higher mortality because we've got all this increased insect and disease, and we have increased fuel loading. Fuel loading means the down dead woody stuff that's on the ground, as well as the young ladder fuels that create that vertical continuity for fires to get up into the crowns. And so this means that forests are much more susceptible to uncharacteristic wildfire behavior. And the uncharacteristic is a nice way of saying, like, a blow up, you know, like really the stuff where, you know, in an afternoon you add 4, 5, 6, 10,000 acres to a fire. That's not characteristic. Oh, I do have this slide. Oh, yay. I wasn't sure if I condensed it out of there. But this is your least shade-tolerant trees, and these are the ones the most adapted to fire. Larch, ponderosa pine, Doug fir, those are pretty good. But when we look at these, the most shade-tolerant are down at this end, and the least shade-tolerant are here, the least adapted to fire, and the most adapted to fire. So when we see what's happening in phytomigration, which means the movement of trees and plants to stay within a suitable habitat, what we see are, as farmers, we've seen our growing zones shift dramatically, but we're seeing now a migration poleward and vertically and elevation, and that's really scary because when you look at how these trees are moving and how much habitat is changing and how rapidly, by 2030, lodgepole pine, where I live, will no longer have suitable habitat. Likewise, but larch, by 2060, not suitable habitat in northeastern Washington. And so what do I see on my property? Now, this could be coincidence. I don't necessarily believe in coincidences, but the sickest trees on my property are lodgepole pine and larch. So, and what's happening then are my good trees that are resistant to fire are leaving, and I'm getting more Doug fir, grand fir, western red cedar. They're most shade tolerant, but they're the least adapted to fire. So this is looking at just in the Intermountain West, the preponderance of trees, species, historically, and then the percentage now. Ponderosa pine, again, a very fire tolerant, not shade tolerant tree, really reduced in numbers. White pine, practically getting wiped out. Larch, really reduced in numbers. But look what's coming up. Grand fir, hemlock, Doug fir, again, these are much more susceptible to fire and they're shade tolerant. So you have a shift in species that's contributing to the issues that we see today. And then insect damage. You've all seen this. So this was a view from my place in Montana. Very interesting. I was looking at this bowl that wraps around and then comes over onto my property on a ridge, and I was watching the mountain pine beetle come up through the ponderosa, and up here is Doug fir in the higher elevation, and the light isn't too great to see this, but you'll see a real grayish cast over there. Spruce budworm. I just watched them march right across the bowl and come onto my property in the space of a year and a half.
Hey, Gloria, I got a question on that one
Yeah.
too. Mm-hmm. So in observing these kinds of things when I was dealing with it, I started seeing early stages, the first 3 or 4 years of a pine beetle, looked a lot like a fire mosaic because they moved with the wind, they moved from tree to tree. So is it a potential that the pine beetles were actually evolved in times when there was no fire to do what fire would do?
I don't know the exact answer to that, but you are right with that last sentence, that they are doing what fire would have been doing. Absolutely. And you know, things aren't random in nature, so I'm sure we've created conditions conducive to insect and disease outbreak, both through how we've managed or not managed forests appropriately, and what we've done, the amount of greenhouse gases that we've put into the atmosphere. So it all ties back, and one leads to the other. Because nature wants to thin this forest, and she's going to do it one way or the other. If we take away one tool, there'll be another one in the quiver that pops back out.
How come
ponderosa and largely replaced by grand fir and cedar under drought conditions?
They're not always replaced by that, but what we see in general is more of the shade-tolerant species coming up.
They need so much more moisture.
They do. They do. But I have a very strange piece of property in that I have 5 dominant species that are all intermixed, and it's really hard to even draw out a little microhabitat. And I've got lodgepole, larch Doug fir, grand fir, and western red cedar all together in the same site. So
No spruce?
no, I don't have spruce. But anyhow, this is just looking at 3 different fire regimes in eastern Washington, which is not all that much different than northwestern Montana, a little drier. A low severity fire, that's what a low severity fire will look like. Some of these trees will come back. I had a friend who was unfortunately sadly burned out in the Carpenter Road fire in 2015, and she was advised along with all her neighbors, cut all the trees, they're all dead, cut them all. She couldn't bring herself to do it. She called me the morning the logger was coming. She said, should I do this? I'm there. How do you feel about it? I don't want to. I don't. Then don't do it. And so, well, you know, I mean, it's pretty hard to tell somebody that just got burned out, oh yeah, leave all that there, it's okay. You know, so, because psychologically it has an effect. But she left all of her trees, and 50% of them came back to life. So you can't, that tree isn't necessarily dead. Maybe its needles are dead this season. It may come back. So don't be hasty in making a decision to cut. Mixed severity fire, you know, we have some real hot stuff here. You can see we're really blackened to almost nothing here, or just, you know, a light impact. And then this is high severity. And this is what typically the years have been, the span between these fires. But they're coming a lot more closer to the low end of the spectrum. And so, and I mean, the past 2 decades, Katie bar the door. I mean, we've been having catastrophic fires almost every year, or high severity. And so you can use forest thinning to reduce the wildfire risk. You know, I think you've all seen photos like this that show the amount of, and this is the same site here. So you've taken out about, 65% of the trees, 70%, maybe more. And you've limbed up so you don't have the ladder fuels that will allow the fire to get up into the canopy. Check out the ground cover though. You know, opening that up, it allows more moisture to hit the ground. It also allows more species to come in, so you get that biodiversity that you want. And this is also assisting in your phytomigration because you're taking a lot less stress off the individual trees. So even if the habitat isn't great, they can still survive. So this is all what we talked about today. We talked about the atmosphere, lithosphere, human sphere, biosphere, how all these are all impacted by climate change. But there are things we can do to start to restore the land, and that includes doing a thorough site assessment, ecosystem restoration techniques, and build your soil. And then the management techniques that we might want to use, which could be crop rotation, could be in doing agroforestry, it could be how you manage or move your livestock around, and then how we get more information and help. Ah, I don't have it, damn it. Okay. Oh, I was afraid of that. I was worried. I thought, okay, I can tell you though verbally. Right now there's 2 primary programs that are available. If you have less than 10 acres of forested land that you're trying to thin, and it may be 10 acres for your whole property, I'm not sure. Typically the Department of Natural Resources or DNRC in Montana, DNR in Eastern Washington, that's a state agency. They get pass-through money from the federal government. And DNR right now, I think they're operating on a 50% payment. And so you do they come out, look at your site, work with you, decide what you want to do, and then you implement the plan. And this is for non-commercial thinning, so this isn't about cutting trees to make money. You implement that work, whether you do it yourself or you hire somebody to do it, and they will pay you 50% of the final bill when you and they'll come out and inspect and check it off. Now, if you have a property that's bigger than 10 acres, you can work with the Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS. NRCS has a program where they will pay 100% of the costs of thinning your property. But you need to have a forest stewardship plan to do that. A forest stewardship plan, you might pay anywhere from a few hundred to a few $1,000s for a professional to prepare that for you. It doesn't necessarily have to be a forester, it's just a forester or a natural resource professional.